most children, babies even, are digital natives now. Whereas if you were digital native 30 years ago, you were very much an elite professional.
All right, welcome to another edition of the Journey to Freedom podcast. And I'm Dr. B, I'm your host. And as always, every time I get to do one of these, I just get so excited. I get excited about not only the people that I'm interviewing, but the folks that are watching that get to experience other people's story. You know, I think story is so vitally important in our lives. And it is one of the things that, if I can say over time, the things I've been most excited about that have helped me move forward in life, that it helped me become the man that I am. It is because of other people's stories. It's because of other people telling me it's possible. And what's the best way to tell me it's possible is to tell me your story, to tell me what you have done. Because it's so easy for folks to come in and they tell you stuff and you go, yeah, right. But it's so much easier when somebody has said, I've done this. And one of the things, Lynn, that has absolutely happened in this process, this year I'm interviewing 100 Black men. We're in 2024. We're in December. I think you're like episode 97. So we got 3 more to go. And then we hit that 100 for this year. And I think I'm going to keep going forward. But there's been some themes. Seeing other people who look like us doing this. Being a father, maybe you and I can talk about that a little bit, and the preciousness of being able to be a father. It has been a big theme, and then from there it's just a matter of just hitting things that people can see that are different than from all of us, and so just so fun to have it. So I'm excited to have you on. Lynn is an educator, and has been an educator, and since I know him, he's a person who goes out and he's got the ability to help serve others. And one of the things, the third thing I guess I would say is a theme is almost every single one of my guests has said, I have this desire to serve people and to serve others. I have this thing where whatever God put in me is I want to make life better for other people. Now, I do have one exception that happened last week, which he said, no, I want to be known as the most selfish man on the planet, and I'm not trying to serve nobody. And so I said, okay, that was an interesting conversation. He also had some very interesting conversations about what his beliefs are with women's roles. So we're talking about that. I have a show on Sunday nights that we're doing live, Why Love Waits, and talking about Black women, and we have a panel on that as to why at this time in I don't know if you know this, in 2024 at least, the statistic says that 50% of Black women who are over the age of 40 have never been married. And it's a huge statistic when you start thinking of 85% that women over 40 have had at least one child. And so you really start thinking of, why are men not showing up? And so we're discussing that on, maybe you and I can talk about just a little bit, but we're discussing that on Sunday nights. And so that was really interesting. And so without ado, I want you to, Lynn, to kind of talk about your life. Whatever that means, whatever the best parts are. And it means sometimes you can talk about some of the struggles that you went through that to get to where you're at today, but why today you're doing so well. So go ahead, introduce yourself, and then move on to your story. Love to hear it.
Oh, thank you, Dr. B. I definitely appreciate being on this show and being one of the 100 Black men to share their story. So my name is Lynn Wilson. I was born in San Antonio, but in short order, my mom moved with my grandparents to Denver when I was about 2 years old because there was some issues, I guess, with my birth dad that she didn't want to stick around for. And so we came to Denver when I was a baby. So I wasn't born there, but I was raised there. All public school, all Montbello. So for those who know where Montbello is, it's in far northeast Denver. It's pretty much a working class neighborhood, probably one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city. And from there, it was really like being raised in a village. I was very fortunate to um, have a supporting cast of a tight knit family, starting with my grandparents and their besides my mom, 4 other siblings or offspring from them. And so I had a lot of aunts and uncles kind of near my age. So I was kind of like the fifth wheel or fifth kid kind of. And so um, I kind of really think the beginning is kind of like this single parent story for a minute, because my mom was very young when she had me. And um, she taught me to be responsible pretty young. One of my first memories I had when we used to live off of Colfax, and I can't remember the cross street, but it was, she let me go kind of to the local convenience store to get some milk or bread. And I don't remember how old I was. I was probably 3 or 4 years old. Now she was following me.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, but the way she did it, it didn't feel that way. It felt like, I was kind of independent. And so that really instilled in me young, a sense of independence, a sense of confidence and being responsible. And so eventually my mom did get married to a wonderful man, a military guy, retired military guy. And I've always known him to be my dad. So there was no dysfunction there in terms of like, who is this guy? It was just more like happy to have, um, a dad there in the picture most, my whole life. So, um, when we moved to Montbello with him, it was like just really understanding um, what it means to be a man from him, like just the role modeling that he had. And then my granddad was also retired military. So discipline and a sense of duty and responsibility for others was pretty early on. And then when my siblings came around, I was much older than them. I was, like my sister is about 9 years apart and my brother is 13 years apart. So I was always the designated babysitter, basically.
Of course. Of course.
So whether I wanted to be or not, that was kind of thrust on me. And so I pretty much, helped take care of my brother and sister pretty young. And that carried over, I think, eventually into kind of what I chose to do later in life, in my, I don't know, second or third career. But I think that it was just kind of that service mindset of, making sure other people were taken care of and not just looking out for myself, that kind of remained.
Cool.
So I did fortunately get a scholarship for engineering, actually. So I went to Montbello High School, which is definitely at the time not a college prep high school. But fortunately, my grades were pretty decent, mainly because there was this guy who came to one of my classes when I was probably a sophomore to visit one of his old teachers. He was a young Black man who had made it up to CU Boulder and wanted to just give back to his, probably one of his favorite teachers. And he shared with us this blueprint. I'll never forget it. It was basically a 4-year map on what you needed to take in high school in order to be prepared to go to college successfully. It said, you had to take 4 years of foreign language, 3 years of, like English and math and all this other stuff. And I followed it to a T. I mean, to me, it was just kind of like, okay, I want to go to college. My parents weren't necessarily, saying I shouldn't go. They weren't necessarily saying I should go. They weren't necessarily saying they had the money for me to go. But I just believed that, it was something that I wanted to do because I was very adventurous, and I felt like I wasn't doing a lot at my high school because I had originally wanted to go to George Washington, where they had a lot more extracurricular
Mm-hmm.
activities and things. And so I felt like, whatever I'm missing out in high school, maybe I can do that in college. So fortunately, I got a lot of offers in state to go to engineering schools, other than the School of Mines, ironically. But then
Interesting.
um, I insisted on wanting to go to out of state. I wanted to go actually to Morehouse. I was very much a fan of Martin Luther King's journey and his uh, fight for social justice. And so I kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps. And so I wanted to go to Morehouse. I applied to Morehouse, and they gave me a whopping scholarship for $300 for a $13,000 a year school at the time, because it was a private college. And so I said, I can't really afford that. And, the financial aid wasn't really looking good either. So fortunately, my mom's oldest sister was a good friend of the director of the minority engineering program, which was like a special program to recruit national merit scholars from all over the country to go to the University of Oklahoma, specifically so if they were engineering majors. And so somehow I got lumped into that. I was far from being a national merit scholar, but because of those connections, my aunt had, they gave me a look. I got an offer for a full ride, and that's how I went out of state. I wanted to go out of state, period. I felt like my time at Denver was plenty. I felt like I was in a bubble. So even though you have this great village of support, sometimes you aren't able to find your own identity when you're surrounded by a loving family all the time. It's kind of like you're part of this communal unit, and you're trying to figure out, well, who am I besides, part of this communal unit. So I wanted to discover that. I wanted to discover who Lynn Wilson was outside of that, and where people didn't know me at all, and I didn't have any networks or plugs or whatever you want to call it. And so that's kind of how my journey in Oklahoma started, which was very long. So I won't get into it, but I basically was a 5-year graduate because I did not complete my engineering degree there. But I kind of had a hodgepodge liberal arts degree where I had like
Okay.
a bunch of different stuff going on. But I wanted to finish because even though I'm first generation graduate, it was one of those things where I knew what I would get if I didn't finish, if that makes any sense. Growing up in Montbello, I saw a lot of stuff. I saw a lot of gang violence. I saw a lot of teenage pregnancy, a lot of, I saw, some of my closest friends and buddies I grew up with throughout grade school end up in jail or dead. And so I'm not saying I was going that route. I just felt like if I went back home, so to speak, I wouldn't be given the offers and access and opportunity that I knew I could get, or I believed, I didn't know, but I believed I could get if I had a degree, if I had a piece of paper I could show, I made it at least to a bachelor's. So that's when something else ended up happening. So like I did graduate, but then I got into a serious car accident. Literally, like the month after graduation, I was driving to Atlanta to start my new life. I fell asleep at the wheel because I had been packing my little Hyundai hatchback all day, decided to still drive it that night. And in the middle of Meridian, Mississippi, I fell asleep at the wheel with my car flipped upside down. And uh, I came to only because I smelled smoke and I was upside down in the car. And so, by the grace of God, a truck driver noticed my mountain bike was on the highway. And in the South, those medians are very, very deep. I mean, my car, once it got off the little side um, part of the highway, it just flipped who knows how many times into the trees. And then he thought whoever was in the car was dead, but he still had enough courage to go and just yell and see if anybody would respond. And I did. I heard this voice. I responded, and just like out of a movie, you know, I was able to squirm out a little bit, but he had to pull me out because the car was so smashed. The windows were not easy to get out of. So he had to pull me out. And a few minutes after pulling me out and bringing me, you know, further away from the car blew up.
Whoa. Oh my gosh. You weren't saying a serious car accident. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad he got you out of there. All right.
Amen. So
Yes.
from when that happened, you know, I had a decision to make. And, you know, I didn't get as serious injuries as you would think from something like that. I bruised my ribs. I didn't break them. I spent a few days in the local hospital there. My parents flew down. My uncles from Georgia came down. Everybody was there to kind of figure out, okay, you know, we need to take him back to Denver. And I said no. And I had second degree burns. I had a few really serious cuts on my arm from the glass, but I still wanted to move forward. And so, you know, my uncles were willing to do that and kind of, you know, look after me until I could recover physically. But I would say the emotional recovery, the mental recovery took way longer than the physical. So that's probably something we can discuss as well. But deciding to move forward, I think in retrospect was, you know, a really good decision because, you know, it really kind of set the tone for my entrepreneur journey, you know, that you're going to deal with all kinds of adversity in life, but moving forward is how you're going to make progress, is how you're going to be successful. Anytime you come up against something that may be a hindrance to where you're trying to go, yes, you need time to recover. Yes, you need time to hit the reset button sometimes or refresh. But you don't ever want to lose sight of your dream or your goals. Yeah. And I felt like if I went back, it would just kind of defer that whatever that ideal I had in my head at the time, which was, you know, to be successful and make it on my own, you know, like that to me was something I wanted to do, not just for my family, but for myself. You know, I felt like I had a lot to prove because I was one of the few, the second person in my family at the time to complete a degree. And here God was giving me a second chance at life, even though ironically, I was deeply involved in Baptist Student Union at Oklahoma. So you can imagine Oklahoma is a Bible Belt. And so very, you know, conservative type of state and attitude and culture. But that accident actually kind of made me lose a bit of my faith. It made me kind of reconsider, you know, why was I, you know, being so fundamentalist in my thinking? And so it actually did the opposite effect of what most people who have near-death experiences may go through. So I went kind of on a separate journey of that as well, of like basically saying, well, hey, I kind of a Tupac attitude, probably, he got shot 9 times and he's just like, hey, I can't die. Well, we know what happened with that. But
that didn't work out too well.
that didn't work out too well. But, I kind of had that same attitude, like, man, I really hadn't taken a lot of risk in my life up until then. And, so it kind of allowed me, at least mentally, to think, okay, I think I need to be more of a risk taker and be willing to be open to things. So I did corporate eventually after recovering from that accident. And it was a large part because my uncles were there, who were like really my role models growing up. They were very confident guys, very good looking, talented guys, could play all kinds of instruments, and they just, anything they put their mind to or hands on, it seemed like it came easy for them. And so, they really helped as well with just like confidence, having confidence. I was a very reserved kid growing up. I was definitely a grade A introvert, sensitive kid. And so when people who knew me as a kid find out later in life that I became this professor, they're just like, you? I can't even see you talking in front of, 2 people, let alone, a classroom or whatever.
Yeah.
So it just shows you just how much, you can change over time. You can be transformed, and your mind can be renewed by faith, as well as by education. For me, one of the groundbreaking moments that I think transformed my personality from that introvert to extrovert was my senior year in college. I had the opportunity, well, it was kind of a promise I made to myself that if I did make it to my senior year, which was very, very difficult to get to, I would make up for not going to Europe as a senior in high school. I wanted to do the backpack European thing. I said, well, I didn't do it in high school. I want to do it if I make it to be a senior in college. And so I found this wonderful program. I was a work study at the College of Business at OU at the time, that they had this summer program. You could go to France and you could go to all these other countries, but you were based in France. You would be immersed in the language, the culture, and business. You would learn about businesses in France as well. And so I was able to get a scholarship to go to Europe and France for a little over a month. And that was life-changing. For most college students, at least at the time, the statistic was that it was like only 10%. I don't even know if that was if it was that high, but let's just say 10% of all American college students ever go on a trip internationally for school. And out of that 10%, only 1% of minorities ever go on a trip internationally. And so it was me and another brother that was a really close friend of mine in college. We had decided to go on this trip. And like I said, I applied for a scholarship that would pay for the transportation. It didn't cover the tuition, but it covered, getting there, traveling to 5 different countries, and just the exposure and the access. And fortunately for me, I did have intermediate level French. So I was the designated out of our group, our cohort of all these different students from all over the country. I was one of the few that could be like the translator. And so me being this really reserved, kind of like, hey, I'm not going to talk to you unless you talk to me kind of guy, being thrusted in front to have to basically interpret and talk to strangers, or whenever anyone would approach a stranger, they're like, Lynn, tell them what you said, what we're trying to tell them.
Wow, it's so cool.
That
That statistic is just amazing that it's that low of folks that actually get to go. I mean, I happen to be a pretty good athlete, and so I got to spend a few summers in Europe doing track. But I can tell you, I took French, but I got F or D minus, and so I wasn't interpreting for nobody other than bonjour. And then like holding that, because back then, right, you had to have the little dictionary that
Yes.
you go word for word for word. Now, I guess with these devices,
Oh,
you can just think something and then you're good to go. But I'm glad you're able to do that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your story. It just reminded me of, my time there, but I didn't realize there was that little of us who could ever get that experience. Wow, what a statistic that we need to figure out how to change, because it changed my life as well as it changed yours, I'm sure.
yeah, absolutely. Besides it taking me out of my social shell, it also helped expose me to a different mindset or attitude about life. It really exposed, unfortunately, Americans' predisposition to live to work,
Mm-hmm.
and whereas Europeans' attitude, at least at that time, was to work to live. And this was the late 90s when
Yeah.
I went. So seeing that play out in so many subtle ways, even architecturally, the design is more geared towards people as opposed to vehicles here. And
Mm-hmm.
so it just really resonated with me. It really connected me to what I valued. And so I think I had been on that journey as well. Like after that experience and going into the professional world, I really was wanting to figure out how to um, make that live for myself, even though, I basically was still living in America, and it's difficult to do. So from there, like I said, I got my first corporate job in IT. I was very good at IT. That was a gifting that I got, thankfully, from my dad, who introduced it to me very young. So I was part of the era. I know this is going to really age me for your listeners, but the era of Commodore 64s at school.
Woo! I remember.
Um, so, but my dad was a retired Air Force guy, so he had been exposed to computers, in military way
Mm-hmm.
before there was even a thing that called microcomputers. So
Yeah.
when the first microcomputers were coming out, I was fortunate enough to also get that exposure, because every once in a while he'd bring some of these desktops home. I mean, I remember having an Atari 400 at home. Um, I remember uh, having a first modem way
Yes.
before internet.
Yes.
We had dial up. I figured out how to get on what they call them back then. Gosh, chat rooms. They had chat rooms
Yeah,
back
the
then.
little chat rooms.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah,
remember? Do you remember? Like I can remember Fred Mail back in the day, where I had to take the I guess the board from my the motherboard from my printer, turning into a modem, and then we
yep.
would do Fred Mail. And Fred Mail, for those of you who don't know, is an electronic mail system that for educators. Because I was teaching at the university and back in the early '90s, and
Wow.
we would have to send a message. And I can remember, so like one dial or one modem would call another modem, it would download your message, and then it would call another modem and download your message, and then finally it would get to across the country. And so we could send an email, and it would take 2 or 3 days for an
Days.
email to be sent across the country. And we were excited, right? Because
Yeah.
snail mail was going to take 5 days or 6 days. So we could get an email to somebody in 3 days. And then you think like today, like you're mad if it doesn't come in, like, you send somebody something. Did you get it? Did you get it? Like if it's
Exactly.
there in like less than a second, we're upset. But we were so happy back then. I remember the Texas Instrument, computer that I
Yep.
had, the Apple IIe's, the
Yep.
the Macintosh, in 1880. people just don't realize before internet, what did we do as kids, right? How did you like watch stuff? Did you see stuff? Cable even had these little push buttons, like little box we had. We had like 28 channels, and you push the button, and the long cord that would come all the way to your chair. Oh my gosh. It just reminded me when you said modem. AOL was, when you hear about AOL and you got mail, that was later on.
That was way later.
Modems.
Yeah.
The chat rooms that you're talking about, absolutely. Go ahead and I love it. Keep going.
Oh, no, I appreciate that because, yeah, I mean, this is, being in technology, so young, that early in the game, you would have been classified as a nerd. Now, I didn't carry myself much like that, but that was had a very negative connotation to it. So you wanted to avoid that at all costs. The irony to me, and I was even mentioning this to my wife the other day, is like, everyone's a nerd today. Like what would have been considered nerdish or in a negative way 20, 30 years ago is a given today. Most children, babies even, are digital natives now. Whereas if you were digital native 30 years ago, you were once again part of that 5-10% of the country. You were very much an elite professional. And fortunately for me, in the late 90s, we were still considered that. I mean, just like how you were talking about being a track star in college, I remember like being almost treated like a star in that industry, in IT industry. You're talking about all of my peers, all of my colleagues. We were getting signing on bonuses. We were getting corporate cards with no budget limit. We were being allowed to travel all over the country or wherever we needed to go to provide support for whatever it was, whether it was a call center, retail store, distribution center, whatever it was. We were treated like VIPs because we were like doctors or nurses. We were constantly on call. So we still had the pagers. Now there was a bit of a transition too. Okay. Remember the transition from pagers to mobile phones was still kind of in that time period. And for me, I was very fortunate to be part of all of that consolidation or pre-consolidation of all the regional phone companies and cell phone companies, because a lot of them hadn't went digital yet. And so I was working for a regional startup cell phone company, and I had interviewed in Georgia, but they said that they were wanting to open up a new site in Florida. And I don't even remember, in the interview, I remember them saying Jacksonville, Florida. It didn't matter what the city was. All I heard was Florida. I heard a coast. And anyone who's lived in landlocked states knows that, most of us want to go to East Coast or West Coast if you've lived in the Midwest for a long time and aren't really into the cold. So when I heard that, I was like, yeah, sign me up for that Florida one. Because they also mentioned like Alabama and Mississippi. And, I'd already had my traumatic event down south. So I'm like, no, I'm good with that. But I'll definitely want to do Florida. So that was also back to that feeling of independence that I had lost, because, now I was kind of under my uncles in Georgia, and I was still kind of cutting my teeth with my first little gigs that I was getting living there, and just kind of in recovery still. But I still wanted that freedom, man. I still wanted that independence and wanted to be my own guy. So for me, that was Florida. And so I did my stint there in this is still the late 90s. This is still before the turn of the century, when some people don't remember Y2K, but Y2K was a significant event for industry. And the reason it was significant in IT was because at that time, Windows ran the world. Windows was was the Google, or whatever you want to call it, of today. They own, everybody's software on their machines was running on Windows. Apple was not even a close second. Apple was a player, but they did not have the lion's share of controlling technology like Microsoft.
Yeah,
And
only in
so,
education did Apple prevail. And we don't know because it was before the iPod and all the other little devices that Steve Jobs came up with. But yeah, it was all Windows. And I was a professor then trying to do this stuff on Apple, and then trying to figure out conversions. And and Y2K was so, I mean, we thought the world was going to end, right?
yes. So I don't know if you're one of those bunker type of guys, but there were a lot of people down south that were building bomb shelters, buying a ton of stuff from Costco, Sam's Club, like they were getting ready for the end of the world. And here we were, these, IT guys. And at the time, I was a IT manager, in charge of a team to make sure that our business wasn't going to be impacted. That fell on my shoulders and my manager shoulders, to make sure we weren't going to have to deal with Y2K messing up our collections and communications. And it was a real thing. It was a real problem, because basically Microsoft, how we get updates on our phones, and it only takes like 2 seconds. So back then, most computers were not connected to internet.
Yeah,
like
the internet
that.
had just begun, so there was no way to push things across. Especially the bandwidth was so low that you couldn't push something across for an update, right? You had to get CDs and discs and all these things, or with the five and the, not the 5 1/4 floppies, but the 3.5 floppies, and
3.5 floppies,
then
as well as eventually CD-ROMs, which was a good thing, because
the
CD-ROMs help.
drives, you could get.
Yeah, those CD-ROMs help a lot more memory than the 3.5s. It was a significant jump. And so thankfully, a lot of our computers at least had that. But it still took hours to manually update every computer. And we're talking hundreds of computers and servers and desktop computers in multiple retail stores and things like that, that me and my team were in charge of doing prior to Y2K. And thankfully, like at the 9th hour, Microsoft finally came out with these update disks that, most of us in the industry knew existed. But thankfully for me, or at least, with the entrepreneur mindset, a lot of regular business folks didn't know. So they were still worried about how they were going to get their smaller businesses to be ready for the Y2K. And I happen to have a solution. And so I didn't really advertise this. It just kind of fell in my lap. And when I was doing taxes that year, that the guy doing my taxes happened to be an owner of of franchises. He was a franchisor of tax offices all over the city. And he was still scratching his head how to fix this. And one thing stood out in the conversation when he saw, my profession and all that. He was just like, wow, okay, you're in IT. He was like, man, I can't figure out how to fix this Y2K. I have this IT consultant that's been trying to do it, and I'm paying him like $150 an hour. And I was trying to keep a straight face, but I was just like thinking about my salary. I was thinking about how much I was working, literally 60-hour weeks, on call, on salary. So, the salary might have sounded good to anybody at the time, but if they knew the hours I was working, it really looked more like 14 bucks an hour. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
So it was like, when I heard that, I just thought, I actually chuckled. I said, man, I'll do it for half that.
Of course. Yeah.
And I was joking.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll do it for half that.
Yeah.
I know how to fix it. And he said, really? When can you start? And that started me on a whole different journey of starting an IT business that basically was parallel to what I was doing for my day job.
Mhm.
And it led to me getting all kinds of cool projects. I remember putting internet into mansions near Sawgrass, which is a where the PGA headquarters is at in
Mhm.
Florida. And so there's these nice homes, obviously next to the golf course. And this guy wanted, this was the AOL era at that point, but he wanted to have the ability to be able to have what we had at our offices, which is the data lines connected in all of his rooms and stuff.
Mhm.
And he needed a contractor to do that. And I was able to get jobs like that. And it was very lucrative, if you can imagine, because this was still cutting edge, right?
Oh yeah.
So it was being able to charge a premium price for, basically, being kind of on the cutting edge of whatever home or residential services. So that was a great niche. But I was not like, I don't want people to get the impression I was like this Elon Musk, a really smart guy. I didn't have any mentorship at the time to really guide me on how to scale and grow the business. I was still burning the candles at both ends. So I was still working my 60, doing this on the side, weekends, things like, I didn't have any life anyway. I mean, I was this young college, fresh out of college. This was great side money, but then it started becoming equal to what I was making. And so I had a decision to make. And by the time Y2K happened, that was the tipping point for me, because it really made me realize that as long as I stayed within a corporate environment, I had to do what corporate told me to do, especially if I was under salary. So I'll never forget, when my boss came in and he said, hey, I'm gonna need you and your team to basically camp out all night on midnight of Y2K until the next day to make sure all systems are good. And, by this time I had pretty much established my business really firm, and I was pissed. I'm gonna be honest with you. I was not a happy camper. I wasn't happy to share that with my team, the workers under me, because they all have families too. And the other part about that, back to kind of the
Mhm.
sense of unknowing of Y2K, it was kind of like, yeah, but what if this is the last? I'm not with my
Yeah, you're not with your family and you're
yeah,
not able to be there. And so I just want to just quick
yeah,
Y2K, if you're trying to understand it, is basically what was going to happen when the year 1999 transferred to the year 2000. The financial system was supposed to crash
yep,
because the computers did not have the ability to move the date from 1999 to 2000. And because the computers weren't able to say, because by then now we're using for all of our financial transactions, we're using it, to communicate in different ways. We're now reliant as a country on these computers working. Like imagine not being able to go to your ATM machine and not being able to get any money for yourself, and then go to your bank and all the money that was in your bank account is no longer in your bank account because we weren't using cash. And so that was the fear that soon as midnight happened, these computers would all shut down because they didn't have the ability to read 2000. So his IT department said, well, we don't know what's going to happen, internationally. So you all have to stay here just to make sure. And at the same time, well, what if your electricity goes out and everything goes out at your house? Now you stuck at work. At that point, we didn't know if even the stoplights were going to be able to work because they were all computerized. So we didn't know if we'd be able to get home. We're pretty safe that the computers in our cars weren't connected to anything.
Right.
So your car would still run. Right. But even then, the software might just erode. So that was the big fear of Y2K. And then, all right, go ahead and finish. Now, I just want to make sure everybody knew, because I know there's some young people on here. Y2K, I never heard of that.
Exactly. No, that was a wonderful synopsis. I mean, I think that really showcases, I really did want to highlight the fear and concern and lack of connection. I mean, the closest family member I had were, hundreds of miles away in Georgia. And so, I still was pretty solo dolo, no family anywhere close in Florida. And here I'm being told, you need to camp out and do your job. We don't necessarily are concerned about your life or your interests. And by then I had developed kind of my own sense of independence. I had started to emotionally recover from that accident a little bit more and kind of spread my wings a little bit. I began running, which was not something I had ever done before. But when I went to Europe, that was something else that had kind of given me a new appreciation. So ironically, Mr. Track and Field, I was not into running. That was not my thing in high school. I lettered all 4 years in tennis, and but running was not something I enjoyed doing, even when I played for the Falcons. So when I did, and I mean not Atlanta Falcons, but high school, middle school, just for anybody assuming. Yeah. But so I want to point that out real quick to people, because I just finished a 10K last Saturday.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
And I got third place in my age group. I've been running since that time, off and on, and I certainly hadn't competed in a long time. Actually, since I've had my kids, I really hadn't gone in any competitions. But I wanted to kind of pause and put and highlight that, because it was, I give a lot of credit to, once again, that going on that trip and seeing something from a different point of view, instead of just kind of my old neighborhood point of view. Because my old neighborhood point of view, when I saw people running, it was either because they were in track or because they were running from something to avoid trouble. So that mindset shifted when I came back, and I learned to appreciate walking and running and jogging, and I took it up as a way to keep myself centered. It's a great form of meditation for me. And just the rhythm of it, I think, and obviously it keeps your body honest.
Yeah.
And so, being able to say that I've been able to maintain that practice for half my life and still do it at a pretty decent performance is something, I definitely appreciate. So stuff like that helped me kind of assert myself a little bit more than I had prior. And so when that happened, it was an instant chip on my shoulder, so to speak, where I thought, well, I have an option, and I think I need to consider that option. And so when that happened, Y2K happened and nothing happened
We all live.
until 2001, which was ironic, right? Everything
Yeah.
crashed actually in 2001. And God forbid, I love that you gave that story, because when we think of the context of the dependency on tech today versus 24 years ago, if something were to happen like that today, I think it'd be 1,000 times bigger
Oh
threat
gosh. Yeah. Way
than it
bigger.
was back then. And we were going haywire then. So today it would be DEFCON 0. So anyway, I said, I need to make a move. I said, this is not the direction I want to go. I was also experiencing a little bit of good old boy network as well.
Yeah.
I was wanting to move up the ranks faster, but that wasn't going to happen. And that was implicitly and explicitly said on many occasions, mainly. And you want to know one of the main reasons or excuses?
What's that?
I wasn't an Auburn grad.
Oh gosh. Yes. Wow. What a
So
world.
yeah. So, glass ceilings, clicks, all of those things uh, definitely exist in corporate as well as outside of corporate. But, when it affects your livelihood, when it impacts how you want to move, in life, you have to start thinking about options. You have to start thinking about, you know, what's in your own best interest, because for most companies, it's whatever's in the interest of the folks, stakeholders, right? Which is, if it's a big corporation, it's going to be the shareholders. If it's a smaller business, it's going to be, the founders and whoever, they like. So um, I said, I definitely don't know what I need to know in order to like turn my company into a real business. So I probably need to go back to school. I went back to school. When 2000 hit, I made my exit strategy, and basically, in short order, I found an IT job at a private university that basically could help pay for my MBA, and also allow me to move my talents to South Florida, to Miami. So um, it was a triple win. It was something very strategic on my part to really be mindful of, like, how would I want to do this. Um, but it could have been a bigger win in hindsight, and this is something I share sometimes with my students. Um, that I could have sold my business. So what I ended up doing was basically closing the business down. I had a successful business. I had, this major client who was giving me leads left and right whenever any of his buddies or offices needed tech support. So I had steady work. But once I decided to move to another city, I just said, hey, I'm not doing it anymore. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm moving to Miami. So, you know, uh, you have to find somebody else. Uh, so I left some money on the table for sure, but it didn't matter. I mean, for me, it was more keeping my soul intact. And I think if you really look at kind of my journey, I think that's something that I always try to fight for is, yes, there are definitely better opportunities that come your way. But will you still be able to keep your soul intact?
Yeah.
Will you still be able to look at yourself in the morning or after a year or after 10 years and say, hey, I'm still doing it in a way that lines up with your values and morals and all of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So after grad school, I definitely gained a lot more confidence and knowledge on how to run a business. And so my heart has always been community focused and oriented. So I went and started a real estate business because that was what was booming in South Florida in the
Wow. Yeah.
mid 2000s. It was a huge boom of real estate going on that I certainly, it was a little too expensive for my wallet, but I was very familiar with another city that wasn't as expensive, and so I started looking at stuff back north
Mhm.
and saying, okay, I want to do community development. I want to learn how to be a developer when I grow up, but I need to understand what that looks like on the ground, and how I can play a part in seeing what responsible developers do, because I was very much aware of gentrification is basically taking messed up hood areas and making them, rebranding them basically. But it's usually a win-lose proposition. It's usually, folks with money that see underserved or marginalized groups that aren't able to take care of their real estate or choose not to, buy them out for pennies on the dollar, spruce up that same property and sell them for double, triple. And we've seen it over and
Mhm.
over and over again in Metro Denver. So,
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
used to be called 5 Points is now called what? Rhino?
Mobile or yeah.
Yeah, whatever it's called, Rhino.
Yeah.
Uh,
Rhino. That's like the Rhino district. Okay. Yeah.
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 Uh, North Side is now called
That's
what?
a good question on that one. We'll
Uh,
build one of them because that's a big gentrified area, and that's kind of on the north. But
yeah, anything north of Federal, we
yeah,
used to call that North Side, heavily Hispanic area at the time, and now, it's not called North Side.
no,
It's
it's called nice side, I guess.
yeah.
Yes, it has happened big time.
So many neighborhoods in Denver have gone through that process, and for I mean, to
It's
me,
the evolution.
it,
It is, but at the same time, you're putting people out that, and were you pushing those people too?
yeah,
That are now buying those. They were able to live for whatever they could afford, and now you say, okay, yeah, we bought you out, or we bought out, especially if there's somebody who's renting, right? Because the
right,
landlord is the one who, okay, I'm going to sell my house because I'm making double what I thought it was worth. But then who's ever gentrifying it is now saying, well, you got to go. And then where is it that those people go? And
right.
that's the big downside of gentrification is you're pushing people, neighborhoods, tradition, communities out of their neighborhoods, creating a new community, but you don't have anything for the folks that you're pushing out.
That's right. So I saw that trend happen in Dallas when I was in OU,
Okay.
and I thought that I could play a part in, you know, not necessarily stopping it, but making it more win-win. Um, Especially considering that, I was a young man of color, and that could maybe help as well, make it more relatable. So this was way before Buy the Block was a thing. And so, there weren't any mentors that I had that were even close to being of color.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, but I was very fortunate that these guys were willing to show me the ropes. And I learned a lot from that. And it wasn't, looking at it now, it wasn't even like 4 years that I did that. It was from 2004 to 2007, so a little over 3 years um, before the uh, real estate bubble burst,
Yeah, yeah.
and it impacted everybody the next year. But on the East Coast, it had already hit on in '07. And so what I gained from that was just this amazing, I call it high school, at least that first year was my high school into not just entrepreneurship, but real estate, and how that works on the ground. You know, you watch these shows on HGTV, you know, like Flip My House and things like that, and they make it seem so fast and easy. And we're talking, you know, in a historic district where most of the houses were 100 years old, needed all kinds of updates, plus bringing them to code. And in one case, one of my houses was even off the grid. It had been so neglected that the electric company had disconnected electricity and would not put electricity onto it until it was actually brought back up to livable again.
Yeah.
And that was my first house.
Oh,
That was
God.
my first flip in a historic district, which means that that's even more restrictive because you have to bring things up to historical, architectural, whatever is approved. It has to look historic. So that was an amazing venture journey. I was not successful in that journey. It was probably one of the first things that happened in my life where I felt like it was truly a fail, and it was humbling because I was like pretty much bankrupted without filing bankruptcy. So I called my parents in 07. I'm like, hey, I think I'm gonna have to move back to Denver because don't have any money. I'm broke, and I think I may have to move back in with y'all. And at that point, I was early 30s, so it was pretty humbling. So, oh, and I needed help from them. I needed some gas money.
Oh, wow. I hear you. So we have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
Because I love this, and we may have to come into another show because I think we will, because I want to talk about some other stuff at some point. But however you want to, you know, capsize our rest of our 10 minutes here. This has been, ultimately amazing. And I would just keep going if I didn't have another show to do, but I want to make sure that you get in what you want to have in here. So, and we will meet again. We will finish this up. So
right on, man. Yeah, no, my apologies. Yeah, I definitely have a long story.
I love it. An
but,
hour well spent so far.
I'm hoping your listeners will at least glean like whatever they glean out of it, to just keep going. You know, never give up on your dreams.
So let's get from 2008 when you lost, you know, everything.
I think I had lost you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yes, let's get back to 2008 and then move forward to where we're at now, because I know a whole bunch of really cool things happened because you ended up back in Florida somehow. So this wasn't a forever, I got to move back home and stay in my parents forever. There is a silver lining here. I want to make sure.
There was a silver lining for sure. It was definitely a you know, just being blessed by the Lord to learn those lessons and buckle down and change my whole approach to how I was going to handle business, and handle myself too. You know, like I think when you're young, you just think you can do anything. And you have to have like a discipline of saying no to certain things and just stay laser focused until you get whatever it is you're trying to get, or get to wherever you're trying to get to. And that was pretty much what I set in my mind to do. But I also wanted to trust God more in that process and not myself or my own abilities. So it was really more wanting to just understand purpose, and do something that you're passionate about. And, we all have to make a living, but I think wanting to do it in a way that, once again, resonates with my soul in terms of fulfillment, as well as doing it for a bigger purpose, and not just, to get rich or whatever. Sorry about that, my little dog. But yeah, I did go into higher ed. So my switch back to moving to Denver basically started my journey into higher ed. And how I came about that was mainly because it was kind of something I had done when I started real estate. I was teaching online, and kind of sounds like a little bit of what you were doing too, but I was teaching teachers how to teach online because it was such a new concept.
Yeah.
In that time period in 2000, early 2000s, that was like new. Like that was not something many teachers were doing. And so I knew how to do that. I knew how to teach people how to do that, but I wanted to do things other than that. I kind of gotten the bug from that. I'm like, man, it would be interesting to get in a classroom though. I wonder if I could be good in a classroom. And so I, called some schools and saw if they needed any instructors, told them my background, told them my credentials. They said, and one school in particular, a for-profit school that I know you know about, said, yeah, we're looking for an accounting instructor. And I said, okay. I had never taught accounting, but I was very, very good at taxes. At the time, I was actually helping a buddy of mine run some tax offices. So, I figure I could parlay my knowledge of that into accounting. It's both of them are accounting beans, just different beans. So I found a really true love and affinity for being in the classroom, engaging with folks in person, and just sharing what not to do, really. Like the first probably decade of my teaching was really cathartic, meaning, I was using it as almost my own therapy on helping people of how you can be successful by not in business, by avoiding some of the things that I was doing, that I had done. So sharing lessons, as well as obviously, all the textbook stuff. But yeah, I did that for my what do you want to call it?
Whatever it is.
Yeah. My third career was basically in higher ed. I moved up quickly into management, and then I moved downtown to Auraria campus, where I also was a business professor down there and managed the business department down there for many years. And something that kind of made me go back into entrepreneurship was really because I saw these gaps, even when I was at the school prior, of too many underserved or just non-traditional students that were going through the same process as everybody else, but not getting the same breaks.
Yeah.
And that really frustrated me. Because it was like, I know life isn't really run that much on meritocracy, but for some crazy reason, I still believe it should. And when,
yes.
and when, I saw that happen over and over again when I would run into some of my former students and they were still in the same dead-end jobs, or they were barely making $2 more an hour, but yet they were owing $50,000 in school loans. That just, I didn't feel like that was right, so that's just kind of been my justice fight for the last 7 years, is really finding that sweet spot for youth as well as working adults who want to level up in life, get critical career skills training, as well as mentorship and coaching that will help them to get to the next level. Even if it's just a networking thing, because I did mention Good Old Boy Network. That is alive and well. Cronyism is alive and well, as well as nepotism. And so how do you navigate with those things as well if you're trying to advance in your career?
Wow. And that's probably a really good segue right there is we're going to come back and talk about that. And so for those of you who are listening, you're sitting on the edge of your seat, you're probably going to just have to wait just a little bit to hear the rest of our story, because we got to wrap up today. But I want to thank you so much for coming on, for explaining and going through your story. I think a lot of the pillars that we talk about were expressed in your story. You know, whether we're talking about health and mental health and how you felt in those different, areas of life. When we talk about trusting people, we're talking about the different folks that wouldn't let you achieve and wouldn't let you move forward. We just talk about identity. The identity shifts that you've had have just been amazing. And I really want to get into, when we have our next show, some of these things. So how did you navigate some of those things? And then more importantly, I guess, what would be your advice to somebody who's coming up, who's now going through something? And we all know that it's just for a short period of time. It's not forever. It's not, yes, you can get through it, and you're going to get through it because, because life moves on. It actually does. And it's how you approach it and how your mindset is and how you think about it that allows you to go through. So again, thank you for being on today. Thank you for your wisdom and the things you have. I promise you folks, I'm going to schedule it as soon as we get off of here, another time for us to get on and finish this conversation for part 2. So you guys have a wonderful, awesome, incredible day today. Don't forget, you are God's greatest gift. He loves you if you allow him to. And we'll look forward to talking to you guys on the next one. Have a great day.